Great to see all of you. Laura, let's go ahead and get started. There's some more folks coming, but I think we can go ahead and get underway.
That sounds great. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Laura. I don't know where you're seeing me on your screen, but it's good to see all your faces. I see a few familiar ones and a number that I'm not familiar with, so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit today. So as Kent said, we will probably be having people kind of join us in this first few minutes especially, but we are happy that you guys are here. This is the first of a series of workshops that we're going to be doing here on Zoom over the coming couple of weeks, and we are excited to kind of see where this goes. So most of you, I imagine, are familiar with the Nurturing Communities Network, but in case you aren't, it's basically a group of communities, intentional Christian communities that are working together to basically support one another and help one another basically live into the healthiest versions of community that they can be. And there's a wide variety of diverse communities represented in that, and I know some of you could give a much better description than that, but we'll leave that for another time. So we had been planning on hosting a conference in Abilene this upcoming May, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19, that seems like that plan is going to have to be put on hold for now. We are still planning for it, maybe in a year from now, we'll see. But in the meantime, we thought, there are other things that we can do virtually. A little bit of a different feel, but hey, it's what we've got, so let's go with it. So we kind of envisioned this workshop series, a call to community in unsettled times. We had been talking about a call to community in a fractured age, and it seems very appropriate to kind of shift that focus just a teensy bit to the idea of a call to community in unsettled times, and that has never been more appropriate than right now, right? We are certainly living in the midst of unsettled times with the challenges and opportunities that brings up. So we're going to have a series of these calls over the coming couple of weeks, every other week essentially. And this week we are being hosted by the Eden community, which Kent Smith, Ian Shelburne, and I are a part of. We may have a few other Eden community members join us over the course of our time together. And we are going to be talking about joy-fueled 4 stories that form our life together. So kind of giving you a little bit of insight into who the Eden community is, what it is that we do as a community, and what are some of the major tools and frameworks and things that we have found particularly helpful for our life together to kind of build community, especially in unsettled times. So on your screen at some point soon, if you haven't seen him yet, you will see Dr. Kent Smith, who will be helping facilitate this. Dr. Ian Shelburne. Ian, you might speak up for just a second and let everybody hear your voice or see you waving.
That's me, I'm Ian.
All right, and then you'll hear from me a little bit as well. But this is very much a workshop, not a seminar, not a lecture. We'll begin with some significant interaction. In the middle, we will have a little bit of a presentation time to kind of share what we have to offer you guys today, but then we'll also end with a significant amount of interaction. So come prepared to speak up if you're able, type in the chat if you need to, and we will also, I've had a few questions, we will be recording this in order to post it online to benefit other people who would love to be with us but are not able to today for whatever reason. So feel free to look that up online later and share it with some people who you think it might be of benefit to. When it comes to getting engaged in this conversation, just a couple short points about some online Zoom etiquette if you're not familiar with Zoom. It looks like most of you are already doing this, but whenever you are not speaking, you might keep your mic muted so we're not hearing background noise. I know here in this house that I'm in, I've got 3 small children and they certainly make a lot of noise. But kitchen sounds, other people walking around, and not a big deal if we hear it, but it will just make the conversation flow a little bit easier if we can keep the background noise to a minimum. And then whenever you are speaking up, you might just mention your name. Hey, this is so-and-so from such and such a community, or I live in such and such a place, just so we have a sense of who it is that's speaking and we can engage you in conversation a little better around that. So that's kind of what I wanted to share at the beginning. Kent, Ian, anything else that you'd add before we really jump into the heart of this?
Ready to go.
That's great, Laura. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, we are so delighted and honored to be with all of you. I see lots of people I love on these screens, and it's good to see you. Good to know that your passion for the kingdom and for life as it's meant to be lived is alive and at work, and that we're all continuing to grow and learn. Speaking of that, one of the things that we have found most helpful in our community, we're sort of semi-amateur neuroscientist fans, and we've been really studying the brain science a lot in recent years. One of the things we found that is so powerfully helpful, it's really grounded in the life and the nature of God, but it's also grounded in how we're made in God's image, is that especially in times like the ones we're in, where things are frightening, things are hard to understand in many cases, hard to control. We're often dealing with distant or nearby grief. We tend to recede into the more primitive parts of our brain. The lizard brain is the simple way to talk about it, where we're in fight or flight mode. And even for those of us who are kind of work-driven, accomplishment-driven folks, we can get into that part of our world where we're really not really engaging the relational part of our minds. And what we've learned, and the psalmist knew this a long time ago, is that one of the very best ways to really see and be with the people that you're with, or to be with God, is to engage in gratitude. So we're going to invite you all right out of the chutes here into a quick gratitude exercise. We're going to break out into some rooms of about 3. And what I want to invite you to do in this next few minutes is just take a moment to introduce yourself to the folks that are in the room with you. These will be randomly assigned, so I have no idea who you'll be talking to, but that'll be good. And introduce yourself, maybe say a word about the community you're part of, and then share a gratitude story. What's something that's happened lately in your life that you're especially appreciative of? Could be something big, could be something small, but share something that you're grateful for. We'll take about 4 minutes to do this. So I'll send you out into your rooms, check in with each other, share a gratitude story. Then we'll come back and we'll dive into the heart of our conversation around the 4 stories that shape our life in God together, and how that's related to being joy-fueled. So let me send this out here, and I'll unmute everybody kind of concurrently here. So in the breakout rooms, you should be able to talk to each other. All right. Well, judging by the smiles on your faces, it looks like gratitude has been helpful. My hunch is that we could probably really fruitfully just leave everybody in the breakout rooms for the whole hour. We could learn a huge amount from each other, talking to 3 or 4 other folks from around the country, and all be blessed in the process. Maybe we'll do that in one of our future gatherings a bit more. But so glad to get to have this time with you. There may be a couple of folks who have joined us since we got started here, and want to extend a warm welcome to you as well. What we're going to do in this next section is just spend a little time unpacking the 4 stories that we've found extraordinarily helpful for helping folks new and old in thinking about deeper life with God together. And the way we're going to do this is I'm going to share a little bit about each story, and then Ian's going to talk a little bit about how that story has impacted us in the Eden community here in Abilene that we're a part of. And then Laura's going to spend a little time talking about that story as it relates to our training of students and others who are on a journey into deeper community. So hopefully between the 3 of us, you'll hear a perspective that makes sense to you. So anyway, we'll dive right into that here. So I'm standing in a hallway in Chicago, Illinois, and a very angry drug dealer walks up to me and says, "Smith, do you really believe in God?" Now, what I want to do in this moment is run, because this guy is crazy. Last year, he left me with a tattoo, permanent tattoo, by stabbing me with a pencil. He's just a dangerous, crazy, unpredictable soul. But I managed not to run. I managed to stay put. I look him in the eyes and I say, "Yes, I do really believe in God." What happens next really shocks me, because his eyes well up with tears. And he says, "Then why did God let my brother die in Vietnam last year?" And then he turns and walks away. He isn't waiting for my answer. As a 17-year-old, I don't have an answer for him. I still don't have an answer for that question. But his question prompted one for me that I've been really living with for the last 50 or so years. And it's this: what will it take for ordinary people in our time to know God for who God really is? And in probing that question for a very long time now, in lots of contexts, I'm persuaded that the most powerful way, one of the absolutely most essential ways that we draw people into the reality of who God really is by telling stories that are true about who God is. Of course, a long time ago, Jesus knew that, and that's why he came as a storyteller. And we've been finding in our work with students, with communities, that telling stories is one of the most powerful and important ways that we can introduce people into the life of the God who really is the God of love. So, in teaching in the university setting, we deal with lots of people with short attention spans. You might have noticed this in your educational experience. So I've learned to distill the whole single story, the master story, the great story of all time into about a 40-second soundbite. Are you ready for it? Here it is. In the beginning was joy. In the end will be deeper joy. And in between is an astounding invitation. Come, share in our joy. Now, even before God made the first people in God's own image, said that's really good. Even before God prepared a garden called Eden, the place of joy or delight. Even before God spoke and said, let there be. Even before the Spirit hovered over the waters of chaos, there was a community, a communion of joy, of self-giving love, a dance that has always been and will always be. And if we run through the pages of Scripture quickly, if we run past the fall and we run past God coming to a man when the first family failed to live into the fullness of God's life, to a man named Abraham and says, through your seed, I will bless all peoples. If we fast forward through when God comes to earth and as Emmanuel, God with us, shows us what God's life is like in a man and in a community that man forms. If we look through the early pages of the story of the followers of Jesus and the communities that they formed that represent God's life, we all get all the way to the end of the Scripture, the last pages of the last book. There we find the people that we would expect to find. We find God, the Father. We find Jesus, the Son, the Lamb, and we find the Spirit again. But there's a fourth, the Spirit and the bride say, come. A beautiful bride made up of people from every tongue, tribe, family, and nation. All the peoples of the world. And to be really clear, that's your peoples. That's my peoples. And this story, in its essence, is a story that begins in joy and ends in deeper joy, where fellowship with God is the outcome. Fellowship in the life of the God who is love, by very definition. So that story, Christians would say, is the story, the meta-narrative that frames everything. Laura, maybe pick it up from, or Ian, rather, maybe pick it up from there and talk a little bit about how that matters, why that matters for Eden. I'm going to have to unmute you, or can you unmute yourself?
Right. All right. The story. Wow. One thing that story, in its grandeur, its comprehensiveness, just its bigness, does is that it opens the door for communities of people who answer that invitation to joy to be incredibly variegated, incredibly diverse, because it's such a big story. There's a place for everyone to fit. I found my mind drawn to one of Paul's well-known passages, Ephesians 3, where he's talking about the mystery of the gospel that's become revealed in these days. And he gets down to verse 10 and says, you know, we're displaying something, and he called it the manifold wisdom of God. And that's, I think, the incredible diversity and beauty of this story. So in Eden Community, one of our values and one of our actual experiences is we got a lot of different generational mix going on. We got some of us who are a little old and gray. We got some who are not yet a year old, and all in between there. We have married couples, we have a single with us at this point. So there's room for that and more in each community as well. In terms of giftings, in terms of callings, in terms of how we look, it not only doesn't matter in terms of it being restricted, we can glory in the way that we have different contact points with God's incredibly big story. And just one more thing, starting a community is hard work, guys, as you all know, and maintaining one is tough. But that the way it ends up, as Kent was telling us, with the Spirit and the bride and the Father and the Son agreeing together, what confidence and what joy along the way, no matter what challenges we face. And I think at Eden, we don't know what our timeline is. We struggle with some of those things, and sometimes we set goals and don't quite make them. But you know what? We have seen the whole story, and so we have a great confidence. Laura?
Thanks. So for what I'm going to say to make any sense, I'm going to have to skip ahead just a little bit in these stories and give you a little bit of framework for some of the work that we do as a community. One of the things that we do as kind of our contextualized ministry as a community is that we do work a lot with college students, specifically at Abilene Christian University at the moment. And we have essentially a multi-year apprenticeship in Christian intentional community. Some of our students have been with us for up to even 4 years now, for those of you who met Jaren already, and some of them have been with us just a few weeks. And so we are working toward essentially inviting them into an experience of intentional community, missional Christian community, and walking alongside them as guides. And so whenever we are talking with our students, framing the story, the big story of God in this way is hugely helpful in a wide variety of ways. But two that I want to mention are that we're framing things from a communal perspective rather than just an individualistic one. This is the bride who is made up of people from every tribe, tongue, and nation. It's not just me and Jesus, but it's me as part of a community with Jesus and the Spirit and the Father. And it's framing things in a very different way than most of our students are used to hearing things and used to going about their lives. And that's a good foundation to work from. And then second of all, I really love how this telling of the story really orients things from a place of joy, the perspective of joy rather than brokenness or sin. And it's true that there is brokenness and it's true that there is sin, but orienting ourselves around a story that begins in joy and delight and ends in joy and delight and is permeated all throughout with joy and delight, that changes things, right? It really reminds us, and now is a good time to be thinking of this, that the cross is not the end of the story. That the resurrection and the new life that comes about because of that Easter is kind of transitioning us into the next phase of the story. It's not even that the resurrection is the end of Jesus's story, but that there's new life and growth and beauty that comes out of even that. And framing things from this perspective of joy, kind of like we experienced with gratitude stories just earlier, it changes our brains, it changes how we engage, and it's an empowering, exciting, motivating kind of story from which to form the rest of our lives around. And we've seen that be immensely powerful with students. So Kent, take us to the next one.
Thanks, guys. Well, you can already tell how much fun I get to have all the time with these two guys and a whole bunch more great people like them. One of the great thinkers, writers of the last century is a fellow named Howard Thurman. Howard deeply influenced Martin Luther King, many others. And he said, one of his favorite quotes for me is, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. Then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. The second great story is my story. It's the story that God is telling in and through me. And often in the Western Christian tradition, we've kind of misappropriated or misunderstood a lot about my story. We quote Ephesians 2:8 quite a bit if we've got some Lutheran heritage in our family bloodstream. By grace we're saved through faith, not through works, lest anyone should boast. Absolutely true, and so important, that foundational truth that we are saved by the gift of God in Jesus Christ. But that same passage in Ephesians goes on to say, for we are God's workmanship, or I like better the translation masterpiece, or some of the newer translations. We are God's poetry, created in Christ Jesus for good works that God prepared in advance for us to do or to live in. That picture of each of us made as a grace, gifted as a grace to the world, is so important in the thinking of the early Christians, and it's often been lost in subsequent eras of the church. Each one of us individually has a grace. Paul's constantly talking about his grace to take the gospel to the Gentiles, but he goes on to say a little later on in Ephesians, to each of us a grace has been given as Christ distributed it. And that's so important to get the point that each of us is a handcrafted dimension or facet of the multifaceted wisdom of God. And each of us has a role to play that is meant to change all of history. To catch the picture, the breadth of what God is up to in the making of each new human being is to have a whole different kind of approach to how we do lots of things. Maybe I'll stop there, Ian, and let you pick it up from there.
All right. So for Eden Community, our individual stories have been all over the map, literally. We not only are at different places in life, but we connected up with the big story, with God's story, in so many different ways, in so many different places, literally all across the world, different countries, different places. And of course, we've got our individual DNA and fingerprints. And I think part of what we have explored and tried to learn as a community has been kind of like Kent was saying, trying to reimagine the individuality that each one of us has in terms of grace gifts, not as an end all or be all in itself, which is the kind of the Western idolatry that sometimes goes on, that, I am me, full stop, but rather to see the mix that each of us is individually, the unique thumbprint, the unique DNA, with the question, how does that enable me to bring from the story, my connection with God, something special and unique to my neighbors and to my fellows in community? And so a big part of our experience in Eden Community has been re-understanding ourselves individually, so that we properly value that, as Paul would say, each according to the measure of faith that God has given. And then that leads us into the next story we'll be talking about in a little while. But we've come to value that individuality, not just each one for our own selves, my own self, but to look at others in that same way and to learn to cherish and to treasure the uniqueness that Laura or Kent or baby Jenny has in our community because of that uniqueness. I'll leave it there, Laura.
Thanks. So this is an especially fun thing to explore with college students who are at an immensely transformative, explorative kind of time in their lives, right? They're choosing kind of where their life is going to go. And so it's really fun to jump into these stories. And looking at my story is a really great thing to do, because it helps us understand more about who we are and how we fit in God's story and how we fit with other people in that story. So in our apprenticeship, essentially, we spend a lot of time drilling deeper into things like personality type, how we function in this world for a variety of reasons, the gifts and graces that we each bear. What is it that makes Clarissa different from Marley, that makes Marley different from Jared? How are they gifted by God and graced by God to be God's presence in this world? And then also things like how we interact. How do we interact well? And we know that we're flourishing and thriving in that. And how do we know when maybe we're not interacting so well? Some warning signs that are coming up in our interactions with other people internally and externally, so we can kind of stop, take a deep breath, get things back on track. So exploring my story, which is unique to every single person, really brings a sense of God's glory into our midst of, wow, God is so multifaceted that God could be manifested in each of us in these different ways. And it also provides a foundation for personal health, which is also really, really important for relational health, right? So an essential part of healthy living and thriving community is understanding who I am and how I fit in this bigger picture. Kent?
Yeah, so the next story is our story. And this is the one that we Westerners typically have a real challenge with, especially Americans. But, you know, really much of the world in these days, we're about 100 years into an experiment that takes us away from a lot of the core skills and values and capacities that humans have always had, namely growing up and living in extended family. Up until 100 years ago, everybody, just about worldwide, from the extended household families of the ancient world to villages to tribal groups, people were used to living mostly around people that they had known all their lives. And that has been the normal way that human beings have lived. With the coming of the automobile and lots of other technology in the last century or so, we're in a totally different world, friends. And for those of us who are trying to live into a deeper level of community or train others to do that, we're up against a real challenge because people don't have the instincts. You know, most of us are several generations in our own families away from the extended family life that was true, say, at the beginning of the last century. So, to reclaim a more deeply interdependent, intergenerational vision for the life that God has designed us for in God's love um, requires some education, and it requires some relearning of core values and a whole lot of relearning of just core practices and habits and skill sets. In Ephesians, um, everything hangs on the formation of these kinds of communities. In the chapter 1, the writer says that it was for God's purposed pleasure in advance that God created these ecosystems. Economia is the word there, but it really means the operation of an extended family household. The ecosystem, it's not just about money, the exchange of money. It's about the exchange of the sharing of everything. And the writer says that all of history hangs on this. This is God's plan for bringing everything in heaven and on earth and under the earth into God's fullness of life through Christ. So this big ecosystem, this big interdependent family is God's strategy for getting the fulfillment of God's purposes into the world. And lots more is said about that later in Ephesians and on into Colossians. But the idea that we are designed not only individually as handcrafted representatives of God, but we collectively together are an ecosystem of God's grace. In each case, in each community, we represent a wonderful flowering of God's life that is perfectly designed and prepared for that place and that time and that context. So as Paul will say in Ephesians 3, this is God's plan for the display of God's multifaceted wisdom, as Ian said a minute ago, even to the powers and principalities in the heavenly realms. This is God's plan. This kind of deep, interdependent, intergenerational life together is God's strategy. As far as I can tell, he doesn't have a plan B. This is it. If you want to experience the life of God, this is the deal. So deeper, thicker community that demonstrates the life, the love of God is really what we're called into. That's heavy waiting for most of us Americans, but it is the invitation, and I think it is the beautiful plan of God. Ian, take it from there.
Part of our mission statement at Eden Community is to be a vibrant family of Jesus ourselves. And that requires some significant reorientation, retooling, as Kent has already explained. A couple of different ways that shows up, I guess, among us in Eden Community. like most communities, we do have some kind of a rule of life, and we frame it in terms of rhythms of attention. We think about how we steward our attention together. And so we have some daily rhythms we do individually and with one or two others. We have some weekly rhythms, some monthly rhythms, quarterly and annual. All of those are not just activity for activity's sake, but we are trying to marshal and gather our attention specifically together so that the vibrancy of the life of God, the life of Jesus, gets expressed among ourselves and hopefully among our neighbors as well. Another aspect of being in our story is governance. How in the world do we make decisions? And I think the wheels come off sometimes with a lot of attempts at community in this particular area. And by the grace of God, it's been really helpful to us to learn to make decisions together using what some people call sociocracy or dynamic governance. We sometimes call it divine governance, which values each individual perspective and voice appropriately, but also is a very effective and healthy way of coming to decisions and giving God, giving the Holy Spirit room to shape those things. So I'm not going to go on much about that, but just wanted to mention those areas because those are critically important to our story as Eden community. Laura?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, it is both essential and challenging to ground young college students in a sense of our story. We want to help them gain a sense of communal identity, not just as individuals, though that is important too, but as people who are part of a people. So a sense of communal identity for those that they're in relationship with, particularly as they're working toward living in intentional community, both during their time in Abilene and as they kind of launch beyond that. So what is it that makes us us? How do we work well together? What is this life that we share together, and what does it look like? And how are we dedicated to working through things whenever things get tough? Because that's one easy one that we like to avoid, right? So by exploring our story together, we really try to anchor students into a sense of communal identity for their current experience of community in Abilene, but also for moving forward as they launch out into the world after they've graduated, kind of setting them up for greater success through interdependence in community. Kent?
Thanks, Laura. So the fourth story, we've talked about the story, my story, our story. The fourth story is this story, and it's the story that God has embedded all of us in a particular time and place and moment in history, where the graces that God has called out, gathered together in the community, the ecclesia of which we're a part, is invited into the big thing that God is doing all around us, right? So in every case, we are in a place that has brokenness and has all the markers that this fallen world possesses. And in every place, we're in a place where God's fingerprints are already there. The Creator God, God who is love, those are also there too. And so one of the great challenges, and Ian has already alluded to this, in our navigating this life together, is paying deep attention to the thing that God is continuing to invite us into in the unfolding of God's story, where we are, this story, the story that invites us to participate as God's good news in a place where God is already at work to redeem the brokenness that's there. Again, that picture that each of us has a bit part, but it nevertheless is a very significant part to play. And we together as a community have a part to play in the grand thing that God is up to in drawing all things into the love and the joy of God. Ian?
So as Eden community, we ask the question about this story. What is God up to right here, right around us? What is he inviting us specifically to pay attention to and to address? So let me just mention two or three of the big things, and Laura will elaborate some on this. But creation care and ecology is very, very important to us as a community, and we're getting ready to build a center in the middle of a lovely part of the country where we hope to showcase that kind of God-directed creation care. Issues of justice for the disadvantaged and the poor are very important to us, specifically as that shows up in homeless predicaments that people are in, and helping them to transition out of homelessness, not just into physical shelter, but into meaningful community. And one of the big ones for us is equipping. We want to be a community incubator to help other people get infected with the great vision of the story and the other stories as well. And I'll hand off to Laura to talk a bit more about our equipping mission.
Sure. So what Ian is referring to there is a wide variety of things, but most prominently at this point, our apprenticeship with our college students. And it's a delight to engage them in this kind of conversation, this kind of exploration, and then envisioning creatively what God is calling them into. And that's basically what this story is about for them. It's envisioning what it looks like to be community in their time at ACU and in this apprenticeship, and then beyond as well. So given the story, the big story, given the unique personal identities that God has given them, and given the life that they share together in our story, what does that look like in context for them? How can they engage in Abilene and the needs of Abilene as a blessing, God-given blessing to that place? And how can they do that once they leave and go off to Dallas or rural Pennsylvania or wherever it is that they end up? And so one of the things that we really love to do with our students is to help stretch their imaginations. We do every once in a while a missional imagination trip that some of our students just went on, where they can go see others in intentional community in context. And actually we got to visit some of you guys from Hope Fellowship not too long ago, and a variety of other places as well. But basically taking them on a trip where they can see by comparison and contrast what life in intentional community is like, and how that illuminates their own personal stories, their own joys and giftings, and the way that they feel God is leading them into community in this story, this contextualized version of God's story. One of the things that we've found really helpful as a tool to help kind of bring all of these stories together is something called the Statement of Grace. We're not going to have time today to explore that in depth, but it's basically a tool that helps us engage each of these stories pretty directly, to reflect on it, to experiment with it, to try it on for size, but also to for our students to practice and envision for the future what their own life could be like in intentional community. If that tool is of interest to you and you want to hear a little bit more, let us know. We'd love to share it with you another time. Kent, I think we're going to move our way into some small group conversations for a little while and then field some question and answers. You want to direct us toward that?
Sure. Well, as always in a deal like this, it's so wonderful to have a chance to share, but we know that a lot of the value is in the room here, and that all of you in one way or another are working with these realities. So we want to give you about 5 minutes here to just sit with the folks in your breakout room and maybe just talk about something that was either striking to you or that raised a question for you in this last bit of presentation. And if maybe you could agree in that 5 minutes on a question or two you'd like to share with the whole group, we'll have a chance hopefully to do a little bit of Q&A as we come back together and wrap things up. So I'm going to open all the rooms and I'll set the timer for 5 minutes and let you know when we're going to need to rejoin. If you have a question that you'd like to ask or an idea that you'd like to share, feel free to do that here. We may not, I'm sure we won't get to anything like all of them, but if you want to, in the chat box there, share a question for Eden Community, feel free to do that. We're getting down to the end of our time, so we'll need to be wrapping up pretty quickly here.
Oh, Todd did the tilting, yeah. Okay.
What is there?
All right.
Todd Tilting did a chat to me.
All right, so so how does Eden live out the justice? From Joe and Nancy. Ian, you want to take that one on?
Okay. Big question. So I'm not sure about a thumbnail sketch answer, but one of the things is reconciliation with creation, with the land, and that's kind of a background one for a lot of people, but it is kind of a front burner one from us. And so we're trying to begin doing that with Eden Center. One of our members, I'm seeing Roston right down there on my screen right now, very actively works, uses a lot of his time to work in our own community here in Abilene, Texas, to help people who are transitioning from homelessness into greater community and greater security of living. So that's one of the emphases. And then besides that, hopefully infecting college students with a passion and an intense sensitivity to justice issues around us. One of the things that we're planning to start piloting this fall is for some of our students, our apprentices, to begin forming micro communities embedded in high need neighborhoods of Abilene, so that they can serve the needs of neighbors, get to know the neighbors, and be embedded there as ecosystems of grace in those places. So that's a short version.
So how do you balance commitment to blood family while living in God's new family? Great question. Laura, you want to take that one?
Well, I might have the least good things to say about all this from all of our community, but it can be a challenge, certainly. Probably one that our family experiences the least because our blood family is not in Abilene, and so there's not as much of a tension there. I would say that it's important to recognize the joys and beauties of both, as well as the inherent challenges of both, and to make space for both, because both are really important. One of the things about our community, unique to our identity, is that we are, at this point at least, a dispersed community. So we're not living in houses together. We do intend to live in houses next to each other whenever we're building out on our land and within the next year. So I am sure that that dynamic will change, but we've really found that the beauties of at least our version of intergenerational community in that way really builds into healthy blood nuclear kinds of families. And so we've seen that be beneficial both ways, as long as there is space made for both, and that we can have the upfront kind of frank conversations about how this is going well or how this is not going well, if we need more space, more time away, those kinds of things. So just navigating those conversations with compassion and self-compassion and awareness, I would say, is a pretty important thing.
Well, we're about to run out of time here. A number of great questions in the chat. What we'll do is try to give at least a brief paragraph level response to the chats here and send that out in a follow-up email, along with where you can get a link to this conversation. Ultimately, we hope this conversation will be on the NCN website. We've been recording it, and so hopefully we'll get at least an edited version of this made available to all comers. One
Can I
resource.
add one more thing, Ken?
Yes, please do,
I would
Laura.
say if some of you want to stick around, that's perfectly fine. We can keep the conversation going a bit longer if you'd like. We certainly want to honor the fact that we said 1 hour, and if you need to step away, that's fine. But if you want to keep talking, I know I love it, you're welcome to stick around.
Great. Well, we'll wind it up officially here in just a moment. I did want to mention this tool. I'm a little biased, but this book is called Joy Fueled. You might recognize that from our title. The subtitle is Catalyzing a Movement of Joyful Communities. And I co-authored this with a couple of other friends. And it contains a lot of the nuts and bolts, as well as some of the deep theological underpinnings of this 4-story framework that we've been talking about. It's not explicit about that framework, but it does take a lot of these conversations that we've begun here into another level. So if you're interested, feel free to pick up. I think the ebook version is still pretty cheap, so you can get it that way if you prefer. Again, we are so delighted to be with you. There will be a series of these conversations coming up. I see Joe Bowling's on the line with us. Joe represents Inglewood, and in 4 weeks from now, Inglewood's going to be hosting this gathering. And then Joe and Nancy Gatlin, who are the current facilitators for the Nurturing Communities Network, representing Hope Fellowship in Waco, will be hosting us in our next gathering in 2 weeks. These are all going to be rich conversations, folks, so feel free to come and bring a friend if you know of someone that you are aware is looking for deeper life in God together, and hopefully we'll all continue to be co-learners in this grand story that we're a part of. What a joy to be with you all. Thank you for your presence with us today. Ian, if you'll pray, we'll wrap this up, and then as Laura says, if folks are free and want to carry on the conversation, they're certainly welcome to do that.
Father God, we thank you for every member of this conversation today, and for every community that is represented, both existing communities and those that exist in vision, those that exist in hope, those that are yet to be formed, because you are the God who brings into existence that which has not yet been. Thank you, Father, for your amazing story. Thank you for your invitation to joy and to deeper joy. Thank you for being the superintendent and master and sovereign of the whole story, all the way down to our individual ones. And we simply ask, dear Father, that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and your love, God, and the fellowship of your Holy Spirit would be with us all now and forever, especially this Easter weekend. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good to be with you guys. I look forward to more of these conversations.
Yeah, I almost feel like this is something that's really neat that, hey, maybe we should keep going with this.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, hopefully we'll get to do that. Hopefully we get to do just that. Have more and more of these kind of conversations.
well, it's especially tough right now because most people are quarantined. But then also, I mean, here in Minneapolis, there's a few communities, other intentional Christian communities that we can collaborate with. But it's just neat to collaborate with different communities from all over the nation to kind of bring it all together in a familial living room experience. Yeah.
Would it be helpful for me to keep reading some of the questions that were put up earlier? That'd be
Definitely.
So this is from Joe Bowling at Inglewood. He said, what have you found to be helpful for more traditional congregations who have not understood themselves as communities of Christ? Ian, Laura, you want to tackle that one?
I think it's a challenging question. I think sometimes our folks whose experience of community is somewhat limited as far as a more conventional church, they struggle to know what to make of people who are trying to be intentional in community. It seems just a little bit weird, and I'm not sure if I can think off the top of my head of a structural or programmatic way of helping folks or making it easier. I do think that if we pay close attention to those relationships and that we have lots of conversations, and we had some good guidance for the art of Christian conversation in a certain recent book I've read. I think if we have those kind of conversations with people, especially in formal settings, I think it's a gradual development of greater comfort, greater understanding of what's going on. But I think that it's really, really key that we nurture those connections and not have an us versus them mentality, for sure.
Well said, Ian. The great Austrian philosopher Ivan Illich said, the best way to change things is not either violent overthrow or gradual revolution, but to tell an alternative story. And I do think that the kind of narrative framework that we've been sharing here helps people, believers of all kinds of goodwill, to kind of reimagine what this enterprise is about. And there's obviously some translation that has to be done between the story, my story, our story, and the way that we've been talking about it, deeply interdependent, deeply mutually aware, and this story. But I think there are many people of great heart, often great spiritual wisdom, who are embedded in more traditional structures, who have longed for those things to be true in their own life for a lifetime. And they're looking for handles, they're looking for a framework that will help them to make sense of what they long for and help them get a handle on how to step toward that. So I think, if we can start with things that we're all after anyway, and again, I think the narrative, I think it's part of the genius of Jesus as a storyteller, is he's talking to people across the religious establishment in his time. And for those who have ears to hear, who have hearts that are open to the kingdom, those stories have a wonderful way of kind of breaking us into reimagining how things might be, that I think is grace-filled and appropriate for folks wherever they are. Laura, what would you add?
Ken, if I could interrupt just a second. David Eddy just texted me, and he and Hannah are trying to get back into the conversation.
Oh, okay, sure.
Let them on.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding me, Joe. Yep. Looks like a couple were waiting to get back in, so yeah. Yeah, Laura, anything you'd want to add on that?
I wouldn't say much, just echoing what you've said, essentially that this way of framing things through the 4 stories is it's good news for anybody in their context if they have ears to hear. And part of the beauty of it is, as Ian was saying, that it leaves so much space for so much variety, for so much diversity. And a traditional congregation can find a way to tell its story in the midst of these 4 stories that looks very different from what a Christian intentional community might look like, but still hits on all of those high points of the story, my story, our story, this story, and that can be a really rich experience for them. Again, may look very different, but all of our communities represented here look very different from each other because of those things.
Great insights. I'm seeing a note from Bob Cameron just mentioning that Move In has had a wonderful history of creating micro communities and challenging neighborhoods. I think many of us are aware of the great work that Move In has been doing, and I love that vision. I've been a big fan for many years and appreciate the reminder there. I mean, as I look across the faces here, I know there are so many remarkable stories to be told, but we don't have enough time. Is our limitation, but every face represents such wonderful history, such wonderful engagement with the principles we've been talking about here. So honored to get to be sitting and conversing with you guys today. So I've got 5 new messages here that are coming up. Let's see if I can. I'm assuming you guys can't see this chat. Is that right or not? I think the chats may just be coming to me.
There's a public chat, but
Messages
there's
you
also a bunch
privately,
that are going
everyone
just
can
to
see
you.
it.
Okay, great. So Beth asks, how does the current reality of suffering and Jesus entering into that suffering play into a story framed simply by joy? That's a great question. Who wants to tackle that one?
Well,
Ken, was that you, Laura?
it was. You can go ahead.
A verse that comes to mind that kind of brings those themes together a bit for me, and this actually, I think, there's some discussion of this in the book Joy Fueled. In Hebrews 12, where it says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, it says, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So I think in the story, in God's big story, the reality of suffering and God's embrace of suffering, God's invitation to share suffering with others is part and parcel of the reality that includes ultimately joy. And so it's easy for us to see them as opposites or irreconcilable, but I think God this weekend with Good Friday and Sunday of the Resurrection shows how those stories are part of the same reality, the lived reality that we're in. And I think the Jesus experience of incarnation and of suffering in the cross, betrayal and resurrection and reconstituting the redeemed community helps us. I think it's a story that helps us draw those things together and form our communities appropriately. So go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, that was much along the lines of what I was going to say, but I really like how that question is framed with the idea of Jesus entering into that suffering. And when Jesus enters into something, it changes it, right? It's not that the suffering will necessarily be immediately gone and replaced by joy, but that Jesus enters into it. The beginning of the story is joy, the end of the story is joy, and in the middle is Jesus entering into it and inviting us into joy and walking with us through the process of that suffering, whatever that has to look like to be redeemed. But the Christian story is that it will be redeemed. one way or another, even if we don't understand exactly how, that Jesus entering into that suffering will redeem it. And so that will look different in everybody's life, but it will lead toward joy. And so I think inviting people to be aware of that, to not negate the suffering at all. That's very important, to not negate the suffering, but to also be reminded that that is not the full picture of what is happening, that that is one part of this larger story that begins in joy and ends in joy, and that Jesus has entered in to bring us back to that place of joy and redeem things.
Yeah, and that's been the story right along, right? If we look at the people of God down through history, I love the old hymn that says it this way: joy in the face of sorrow, peace in the midst of pain. Jesus will give. Jesus will give. He will uphold and sustain. It is the fact that we serve a risen Savior, right? Who has experienced all of this, and as God understands profoundly beyond anything that words can describe the suffering of humanity, and has taken it on himself. That we know that the story doesn't end with sorrow, doesn't end with chaos, doesn't end with sadness, but those are inevitably a part of the process of redeeming a world that's profoundly broken. So yeah, I like the way you guys have said it. Don't have anything more to add, I think. Great question. And one that I think anyone who talks seriously about joy will find themselves having to talk about quite a bit, because most folks' experience is not unbridled joy, right? It's not relentless, hassle-free living. And if that's what we think joy means, then we've missed the point, I think.
And if that's what we think community means, then we are far off base, right? As we can all attest to.
Other questions or comments?
Kent, I had asked a question up above. The question is, what are the signs that you notice when community life, our story, is most healthy or least healthy?
Great question, Evan. Comes from a person who understands community historically inside and out. Thank you for asking that. How would you guys respond to that? Great question.
One thing that I would say is that you can look at the individuals within the community and see if they are healthy or if they are unhealthy. A healthy community will nurture healthy individuals, and healthy individuals will nurture a healthy community. So it's kind of a two-way street there. But if you can look at a community and see these people are all doing horribly, whatever that looks like for them according to their individual personalities, then there's probably something lacking in the community itself. I would say one way in which a lot of communities seem to have particular difficulty is about decision making. And that's a whole other can of worms that we could get into today, but it'd be an hours long conversation, I imagine. But seeing if they are making healthy decisions together in ways that are mutually supportive, and that honor the voices of all people and the needs of all people, I think that's one sign of a healthy community. And when that's lacking, a sign of an unhealthy community. What else would you guys add?
One thing I might add, it's tempting to suggest that a community that is healthy is one that does not have a lot of conflict going on, but I don't think that's a good, I think that's a shallow, superficial observation, because human beings are, if we have any respect for individuality and diversity, will engage in conflict. And so I think a sign of a healthy community related to that is not the absence of conflict, but what is done with conflict. Is conflict appropriately valued as an opportunity, not as a defeat, but an opportunity to understand each other better, to come to deeper understandings of how our story can be a healthy story. So I think sometimes paying attention to how a community handles conflict. You might have a community with a lot of conflict going on, but if they are managing it in such a way that it issues in life and people coming alive through that process, then I think that's a sign of a healthy community.
Yeah, those are both great responses. I guess the other thing I would just mention in passing is I think one of the markers of healthy community is how the most vulnerable members of that community are doing. So, if you have elders who are not very strong for whatever reason, if you have, I think it's always good to look at young women and see how they're doing in a community, because they're often among the most vulnerable folk in the community. To look at the people who are most vulnerable, the children, the elderly, those who are hurting physically or emotionally, and see how well they're being supported in their entry into a deeper level of their own grace. I think that's one of the markers of a healthy ecosystem. We sometimes say ecosystems that have access to themselves grow more healthy over time, and that means all the parts of themselves, right? The less uh, respected, the less impressive, the less often seen. I mean, that's really just a paraphrase of what Paul says, right, about the body. Some parts are less presentable, and yet a healthy body is taking care of all of its parts and recognizes that the ultimate health of the body is dependent on the health of all the parts. That's a great question, Evan. Thank you.
That really connects with an observation and question that Pavlos shared with us in the chat. He said, I found that the people who are mostly in desperate need for community are also the ones who don't open up no matter how hard you try to create a safe space for them to do so. How much energy should be spent to get them to open up versus focusing on the people who are already deeply involved in the community? That is a question that I don't feel like I have a great answer to. So I'll let you guys all answer that. Anybody?
Here at the Lotus House in St. Louis, we kind of had a process for onboarding new members after the first couple times people moved in, and we realized that reorienting them to the life of the community was kind of an unwritten, unspoken challenge for people to learn what the rhythms were. And so we created an novitiate process, which was basically just a more established member of the community, had time to check in weekly with the person, kind of answer questions in a less formal setting and kind of talk through rhythms and life. And that also allowed adjustments to new people. But we did have some experience with taking on members who sought out the community and had some prior mental health issues or other challenges. And so I think that process allowed a little bit more one-on-one integration into bringing people in. It did take time to kind of open people up, but I think it didn't necessarily take away from the life of the community. I think we realized that as a healthy community, it was hard to do that unless the community was in a good homeostasis. But once we were, I think it just was an added attention toward new people coming into the community and what challenges they may, have come into community with, and just being really open and direct around connecting with people and bringing them into a place where they felt kind of a psychological safety about, opening up with who they were. We had some members where, coming out of some traumatic experiences personally, it ended up not being a good fit, but we had others that allowed that opportunity to open up.
Great insight, Daniel, and spoken like someone who's been there and done that, been in the trenches. I mean, it's a complex question, right? It's a challenging question to think about. How do we welcome the all comers? And I think the short answer is we don't. There's a clear demarcation that is around the calling of each community, which says that this is not for everyone. This is for the ones that are called to this expression. However, God has a place for everyone. And so I think we have to always be wide open to the possibility that this person that we may not have had on our radar should be considered, and I think that's a part of the ongoing discernment and governance process that Ian was talking about.
And to dovetail off of that, one of our experiences, we came out of a bad experience where someone new joined the community and there was severe conflict that we had to bring an external person in to mediate. We had set up a mediated meeting structure. So the community was kind of burned by this bad experience where somebody decided to move out after a conflict couldn't be resolved. And so then after that, there was someone else who was interested in joining the community. And at the time we told him, no, it wasn't a good time. And it was really hard to do that. But maybe in the Benedictine tradition, this person continued to come around to our community dinners, continued to ask. And over time, we entered a place of where we thought like we were in a better health, and we were able to, invite that person in, and they become, a huge strength and an asset to our community over the time. So I think sometimes that's the challenge, is not right now, but maybe in the future, and kind of, having the openness to allowing those things to grow and to develop.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting in the ministry of Jesus, there are layers, right? And I think that everyone who wants to take community seriously, and many of you who have been at it for many decades could speak much more authoritatively to this than I could. I'm looking at you, Sister Sally, and some of the others from Reba, but certainly Joe and Nancy. But the simple truth is that Jesus doesn't have a come one, come all into every layer of fellowship, right? He has a beloved brother who has a special relationship with him. He has a band of 3, Peter, James, and John, that are with him in his high moments and his low moments. He has the 12. He has a mixed gender group that's traveling with him, supporting their work, that's moving together. He has the 70 that he trusts enough to send out in his name. There's 120, and they're the crowds, And so, one level of fellowship may well be appropriate for someone, and not another level. And we have to get comfortable with that reality, that it's not a one size fits all, and that all of us, just by the nature of our human limitation, will only be able to be so close to so many people. And so we have to continually not only discern who that group needs to be, but also to be open to helping others who are coming our way to find the community that God's calling them to, if it isn't us. Friends, I'm going to have to step away here, and I suspect that even though we could keep rolling all day with great questions, given the people that are on the call here, we probably ought to respect the need to bring this to a close. And God willing, our good friends, the Gatlins and the community there at Hope Fellowship, will be prepared to launch another rich conversation here in a few weeks. And in the meantime, let's continue to co-discover what it is that God's calling us into in this great story. Such a pleasure to be with you all. Many blessings on you. And in these days, may you have the Lord's peace, and may his face shine upon you.